Hi there. I'm Abby Schomer, co-founder of RevScience and host of the Marginal podcast, which gives voice to the socially marginalized founders and startup contributors you've likely not heard from yet. Today, I sit down with Rosalyn Mahashin, co-founder and VP of Marketing and Strategy at Resilient Moment, a digital mental health startup. Rosalyn is an experienced growth leader, previously leading strategic partnerships for social impact programs and products at Google and Meta. She also held various roles in the nonprofit sector and fundraising and marketing. Rosalyn's lifelong commitment to social justice and personal drive comes from many facets of her life. Being a child of Vietnamese boat people, a first in her family to attend college in the United States, and someone who experienced deep grief through sibling loss. All of these experiences and more contributed to her own personal journey, which led her to create Resilient Moment with the goal of helping more people in traditionally underrepresented communities gain access to mental health and well-being tools. I'm so excited to share Rosalyn's story with you all today. And with that, let's get into it. Well, thank you so much, Rosalyn, for joining us today.
Thank you, Abby, for having me. It's so great to be here.
Yeah, we were chatting before offline about how your background is very appropriate for this discussion. It's very serene, it's very meditative. I think it lends itself well to a lot of what you're doing today.
That's so great. And it didn't always start that way too. So it's a journey like everything else. So I'm definitely glad to get a chance to share it, and your podcast makes that possible.
I know, and I think it's so serendipitous how we found each other. We actually
Right.
have a shared history. Rosalyn and I were both at Facebook. I don't believe we overlapped, though.
I believe I was there from 2015 through 2022. So,
Okay, so we did
but
have a little bit.
yeah, but had a chance to just have it. The company grew so much. So it was really challenging to get to meet people across different teams because I feel like we were siloed. But I was in the Menlo Park offices for most of it and then worked remotely.
Fantastic, Rosalyn. Well, I'm sure at some point we'll touch a little bit more on your experience at Facebook. There's a lot to divulge there, but I usually love to kick off these conversations with a bit of an origin story. I'd actually love to get an understanding and to share with our audience a bit about your background, kind of your life pre-startups, pre-corporate. Tell us a little bit about some of your childhood.
Yeah, sure. So I definitely think that there's a lot of layers to everyone's story. So what I share, I hope will resonate with some, and for others, I hope will add a different perspective. But I think that's kind of the beauty of the podcast that you are leading, is getting a chance for people to speak up, share their stories, which I think is so terrific. For me, I am the child of Vietnamese immigrants. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I ended up studying computer science and communication in college, and grew up in a time where Silicon Valley was just growing before my eyes. So had a chance to really see all this opportunity, was excited about the space that tech afforded. And then as an opportunity, like ended up pursuing a career in tech after college. I wasn't born into privilege in a sense. So it wasn't until college and until I started my job where I really got a chance to see what was possible and what was out there for me beyond what I had probably had many people expecting of me to do. So, crossed off a lot of lists in school. In my college years, found myself like really surrounded by a lot of wealth and excess, and just thought, wow, this is pretty incredible for me to be part of this. And how do I find out a way to figure out where I belong in this? So I had student loans coming out of school, and I always had a really strong sense of community and responsibility. I'm the first in my family to attend college in the States. And I'm also a first generation career person in my family. So it's really, interesting to kind of see the expectations that people have for you. And I grew up just wanting to check things off of a list. I wanted security, I wanted stability, I wanted something that called attention to my family and what they found was really important. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. So I was drawn to tech. I ended up in the tech space, but I always had a passion for entrepreneurship. And I always saw that as something that I wanted to think about doing probably later in life, and wanted a chance to figure out what exactly that was, but ended up working in advertising and marketing and business development. So that was where I eventually crossed paths where I was working on the business development and partnerships team at Meta and actually was affected by the layoffs in Meta in 2022. So was looking for what to do next. And that's how I ended up finding my co-founder, the Dean, and we started a Resilient Moment after that. And that's really where we are today. I think a lot of my journey's just been a big transition and series of like seasons, like a lot of people. And that's how I ended up where I am. And currently, I'm the co founder of Resilient Moment. I lead our growth and our strategy work. Been a first time founder working on this for the past 18 months.
Fantastic. What a journey. As someone who also lived in the Bay Area for 7 years, I think it's really interesting. You speak a little bit to the level of privilege in the Bay Area, and I'm sure you saw that evolve with time being kind of a native to that area. When I was in the Bay Area, I was stricken initially by some of the immense wealth and generational wealth in the Bay Area. Also by how fleeting and how transient a lot of the people living there were. A lot of people were brought there because of their work, because they had these incredible job opportunities that afforded them great salaries and the ability to live in arguably one of the most expensive cities in the country. So it's a really interesting juxtaposition, you having grown up with your level of resources compared to other people who may have been coming to the Bay Area who grew up very differently.
Yeah, it is a huge juxtaposition. I think what people don't always realize is that San Francisco started out as a huge beacon for immigrants. I mean, there's this so much history behind like the different types of immigrants that have come through to San Francisco specifically. And my family ended up there because it was one of the biggest places where Vietnamese immigrants migrated after the war. So they were boat people. They were living in Vietnam during their civil war, and they essentially escaped in the middle of the night on a boat crammed with about 35 other people and survived for a few weeks with limited food, water, and crowded conditions on this small fishing boat and were eventually rescued by the US military and taken to a Thai refugee camp where they lived for 18 months. And my two older sisters and my mom and dad lived in the refugee camp, and we were sponsored by a family in San Francisco. And our family had just recently moved out. Many of them were boat people as well. And they sponsored us to live in San Francisco. And I was born about 3 months after my family arrived in the States. So my mom was pregnant on a plane going to a new country, starting all over. I respect them immensely for the types of sacrifices that they made. And I think that really shaped a lot of who I am. And it also kind of tells you some of the effects of generational trauma because they went through so much and they sacrificed so much. A lot of that carried on to future generations and the expectations that they had of their children. So for me, failure was never an option. So I grew up with an extreme fear of failure, wanted to essentially check as many things off of the box as I could. And I think it was, seeing how the Bay Area was changing and evolving that really got me interested in tech in the first place. I sometimes don't know what would my career be like and my path would be like if I wasn't living in Silicon Valley and I had that exposure because I would likely not have had the opportunities that were afforded to me through internships, through study programs, and just by being placed in Silicon Valley. It was a really, fortunate opportunity for me to work in tech, and I nowadays really do recommend, that people ending up in the Bay Area, whether it's like a short moment of time or others, like going to the Bay Area, spending time there. It's a truly incredible, but it has evolved and it's changed a lot.
Absolutely. One of the themes that we're already kind of sussing out when we're speaking to a lot of different founders is this theme of starting over. And it sounds like your parents started over. They moved to a country where they didn't know the language, they didn't have an existing network, and they started from ground zero, and then they started a family. They started a new generation with you. And it's interesting because becoming a founder in a lot of ways is starting from ground zero. So I do think that there's something innate in people who have parents who have started from ground zero, or throughout various points in their own lives, they've had to start over. We have a little bit more, or folks like yourself, I often find have a little bit more of an acumen just by virtue of the way that you grew up and the behavior that was modeled to you. But then it's really interesting because your parents also, the stakes were so much higher because of how you did enter into the country and what your parents sacrificed in order to get here. So I can imagine that was an immense amount of pressure for you as well.
It was, I think, for my family with growing up and being taught that failure wasn't really an option, that for me limited my worldview in terms of exploring what truly made me happy. So I think that was really what led me to start a digital mental health company,
Yeah.
because it wasn't until likely about 10 years into my career when I was just, I was moving up the career ladder, trying to get on the promotion track, what I thought was what was expected of me, being able to go on big business trips, like handling large accounts, being able to have the bounty and the plenty that was surrounding me with tech perks and benefits and a nice salary. Those were all things that I felt that I should have in order to be happy. And I realized in my 30s, I'm in the 40s now, but in my 30s, that was when I really started my mental health journey because I was just really unfulfilled. So I got extremely anxious from work. I was really burnt out. I wasn't happy with the progress that I saw in my life. It was affecting a lot of my personal life as well. And it started to just seep into a lot of aspects of my day to day. And I think there was essentially like tipping point where it just started to affect me physically as well. So I just was exhausted. And it was through that health seeking that I ended up just really working on my mental health. So got a chance to like really get treatment, work on different types of plans, and I found mindfulness again. So I was raised Buddhist, and meditation was actually a really big part of the early education that I had as a kid. So my Saturdays were spent at a Buddhist temple in San Jose, learning the Vietnamese language and the culture, and then also meditating. And when you're 10 years old, you're probably not going to want to be staying in a temple meditating. But I felt like that discipline was something that when it came to me in my 30s again, I thought, oh my gosh, like now I understand what I was being taught when I was a kid, and found meditation, found mindfulness. And I felt that that really helped me do a few things like slow down, take stock of where I was, and like look inside myself and find out what made me happy. And I was fueled and motivated by really seeing things grow and scale and being able to innovate with cutting edge technology. So that was what drew me to my current career in tech, working in business development. But I also felt that the process was so difficult. And I can't imagine what it would be like if I didn't have health insurance and I had to go through that. There was just costs, time associated with being on wait list, finding who would be the right therapist and finding the right treatment plan. There's also this huge stigma attached. So I didn't feel like I could share or talk about this journey with anyone. I felt really isolated in that sense because in the Asian community, it's changing, but there's still a lot of stigma. I've learned a lot more about this since I've become involved in the industry, and only 8% of Asian, Pacific Islander, and Native Hawaiian people actually get mental health treatment compared to about 18% of the general population in the States. So there's a huge gap between people who may need help but aren't seeking it for a variety of different reasons. So I saw it as a problem that I wanted to be involved in, and I wanted to somehow be a part of the solution. So that really got me into the space.
I spoke recently about my own struggles with mental health, and a lot of that really was exacerbated by my affinity for achievement as well. And a lot of that definitely culminated during my time at Facebook. So maybe we can relate deeper on that level than we even realized. But it's interesting talking to previous generations or family members who aren't as outspoken about mental health and aren't as big of an advocate of mental health. There is shame tied up around mental health in this country in general. I think it's something that we're having a little bit more of a reckoning around, but it's still taking certain people some time. So when I heard about you growing up Buddhist and doing meditation, it's interesting because I think parts of your culture growing up were characterized by some mental health practices. Like that is practicing mindfulness. Do you see the connection now? And do your other family members see the connection now between the way that you grew up and the work you're doing now? Are those parallels really clear to them? Or does things like meditation and things inherent in Buddhist culture still feel very far away from more explicit conversations around mental health?
Yeah. Well, when I first started my mental health journey, I found Calm and Headspace. So those were the two major meditation and mindfulness apps that I was using. And I didn't made the connection. So I hadn't made the connection necessarily until I started practicing mindfulness and talking to others in the community and refound like the Buddhist community that was close to in my neighborhood. So ended up really just discovering, wow, a lot of the chanting, the type of structure, the practice that goes into building a mindfulness practice actually resonates with a lot of what I was taught way back then in Saturday language classes. And I didn't see, though, something that actually mirrored what I grew up experiencing. For example, it was really hard for me to find bilingual resources. So I couldn't find a lot out there that wasn't in my native language about mindfulness. And there wasn't a lot in the modern take on mindfulness that was in Vietnamese or a language that I found like more accessible. So it made things harder to kind of cross that generational cultural divide and just be able to talk to people in my community about it. That version is like that version of meditation mindfulness is a little bit too woo woo in the sense that it wasn't something that you could directly relate to because you don't see it necessarily. So I was really intrigued to see more and more like bilingual resources be available in this space, but I still don't see as much of it. So I think that's why with Resilient Moment, our app in particular is offered in 34 different languages. And we really took a measured approach to being inclusive in how we built the products because we wanted more people to be able to experience it. I think tools like Common Headspace really skyrocketed conversations about meditation to the mainstream. So I have so much to thank for that because it kind of brought me back to meditation. And now I feel that because of its cultural roots in Buddhism and East Asian culture, that it's also something that I feel like I can bring to the table as well as a founder now, like building for a new generation. So that is one of the things that's really motivating. When I talk to people and tell my friends and family that I'm building something, they don't necessarily see the correlation between what we were taught and now. And I actually want to be able to bring kind of the best of both worlds. I want to be able to bring this really approachable, accessible form of mental health and self help, and then really tie that to the traditional roots that I was raised in as well. Like there's actually the two can coexist. There's just like different ways of approaching it, and not every approach is for everyone. So it's just another way of looking at how to achieve self care and how to find calmness in your life.
I think this speaks so much to, as well, the importance of who is on the founding team of a company. And we've spoken about this previously. The founding team and every hire early on in a company's life cycle is so core to building not just the cultural DNA of the company, but the product. Who builds the product and informs product development will determine how accessible that product is, how inclusive it is. And I think everything you just said is a testament to how critically important it is that you specifically are at this company influencing product. I'd love to hear a little bit more about Resilient Moments' approach to hiring, diverse hiring, and just how you think about whose experiences you want to bring to bear on building Resilient Moment.
So the more diverse voices that you have in your organization, the more opportunities that it opens up. I look at my own experiences as a woman of color, as someone who's gone through a mental health journey, but then who also has a background in building consumer products and B2B products in big tech, bringing them to scale. Like those are all intersectionalities that I bring to the table. And instead of looking at what gaps I have, I try to turn that into what I feel I can bring to the table at my company, why I feel like uniquely qualified to be working in the space that I do. And when I set out to start the company, that wasn't necessarily the path that I wanted to take. I was most interested in either staying in big tech because of the stability, because of that, wanting to fill what's on that checklist and do what other people expected of me. But really being laid off actually gave me a kick in the pants to think about what I should be doing with my life that was worthwhile. Like it gave me a sense of an opportunity that was out there that I could now take part of. So I had mentioned I grew up not surrounded by privilege, was really surprised to see so many people start their own businesses um, and be successful at it, but didn't really always look like me or come from the same backgrounds as me. And it was, for me, it was largely financial, but there was also this mental barrier to, oh, now's not the right time. Like I need the financial stability, or what if I fail? So there were all these concerns that like came to bear. And when I was looking for a job after the layoffs, I got a chance to meet with my founder. We had a lot of conversations about like what industry was like and what it could be like. A few things happened for me that I found that were really pivotal in like why now. And it was around me feeling in the right space to do this and feeling like I had tapped into a solution that I knew needed solving and that I was probably one of the few that was going to be able to spend time solving it. I was really excited about an opportunity to be able to make a difference in this space. And when I set out with my co-founder, I met with him. He also brought this layer of empathy and compassion to the space, which I found was very rare. He had a vision around like setting like very specific core values for the team he was trying to build. He was very conscious about where he felt like he had strengths and where he felt like he had areas that he could tap into others for. And that really resonated a lot with my own philosophy of just being able to build with integrity, with intention, and at the same time, get a chance to hire people who are better than you and hire people who are going to help make you better at what you do. So that was really core to us as we set aside and built Resilient Moment. And when we were building for that, like we were very intentional about who we included in the conversation. So for every one male engineer that we were speaking to, we're trying to talk to another woman who was also like building. And I think just trying to match and also just balance the scales was a really key piece of it. And we found some of our very, very, very first hires just through reaching out to a lot of people and talking to others. So we just made sure we were very clear about sharing our vision, not just only for the product, but for the team.
That's fantastic. I can completely relate. Even when it comes to finding a co-founder, having somebody who is really values aligned is so critical. So I completely resonate with what you said there. And I think Vadim demonstrated to you that he would not just be a great co-founder, but somebody who would hire with inclusivity in mind. And it's honestly, I wish that were the standard, but people build companies for a lot of different reasons. And when you can find someone who wants to build a company for similar reasons to you and also uniquely identifies what you can contribute, Rosalyn, to that conversation, that is incredible. So I'm so glad that you found that, and it does feel like you and Vadim complement one another's skill sets so well, and you each bring your own unique experience to bear, and how you speak about the company, how you talk about hiring for team is incredibly inspiring, and it's something that everybody listening to this podcast needs to hear. Fellow founders, fellow startup operators, this is how you get things right. You get it right from inception, and that really sets the tone for the types of people who'll be operating at your organization and the types of people they'll go on to hire. So I think
Yeah.
it's so critically important. I would love to understand. I think everybody talks. Actually, I will caveat that I don't feel like people talk enough about how lonely entrepreneurship is. I don't think people talk enough about how lonely and sometimes stagnating being a founder can feel. I think sometimes that can be exceptionally true if you are a group that is less represented in startup culture and you don't feel like you have your proxies when you go into these other spaces of founders. How has that been for you, Rosalyn? Especially somebody who's very keyed into their own mental health. How has your mental health been operating as a founder? And would you have any advice to other founders or female founders as they're potentially embarking on this similar journey?
Yeah, I think one thing that I want to take away from this experience, and I'm just like still in the throes of it myself. So I am by all means just starting on this journey. And it's something that in a way, I knew what I was getting myself into. I felt like I was at a space where I was self assured enough to be able to embark on something that I knew was not going to be a flash in the pan kind of opportunity. Like in a tech career, you might be able to, hop from a company to another, find a different team. There are always easier paths to getting to an end goal of financial stability or just a really big salary or making money. And for me, the fulfillment that I get from this work is being able to kind of see the impact that I'm making directly and building with integrity in a way that I want to be able to build something because I really value being able to hear the opinions and voices of our users in this. So we're really user focused. A lot of what we've done is just dozens upon dozens of customer interviews before we even started building and
Right.
months of research. And we set aside with like a very clear intention to build a product and test it purposely for a year before we released it on the market. So our product Joyment.app is coming out soon, but it's been about a year in testing because we knew we were building the digital health space. And trust is such a huge component of how you have people return again and again to use your product. Like they trust it, they value it, they're sharing at times confidential things in this space. So you want to be able to build that trust and confidence in someone. And that was really why we wanted to test with real people and get their feedback about how we could improve. So I think that's really helped us in the design process. And in terms of, thinking about our own mental health, like that's a big piece of what we do. So we have to be the culture carriers as leaders of an organization or as contributors. Anyone can be a culture carrier in the sense that they can embody the values that the company is trying to build. And for us, that's a big piece of our work as well. Like we don't always get it right, but we try to strive for balance. So I'm very clear with people that I work with around how to really set boundaries and to set boundaries with yourself. So making sure that you're working during the hours that you say you're going to be working and intentionally being very clear that you might not be able to contribute if you have too much on your plate. That's something that runs counterintuitive to me in the sense that we work at places like that are very fast paced, very competitive. You do feel that your list of accomplishments and the output that you deliver needs to be like just on top and better and faster than anybody else. So I always tell my team, especially since I've been able to work with people who are very young and early in their careers, to be able to set those boundaries correctly. Just being really honest and frank and sharing. what I might feel about a situation. So I might spend more time like going through my thought process or sharing my reasons why I'm doing something a particular way. And I do go out of my way to try to do that because I think it's great for people to be able to learn from each other's mistakes and to also know that it's okay to make mistakes as well. In addition, when we are able to really grow, like I would, of course, love to bring in a lot of things that I saw from the corporate world that were just really beneficial. So being able to provide people with the stability that comes with having a great benefits package and just being really open and candid about like the types of support that people have and ensuring that you're advocating for that. So when we build that in, since we don't have like a head of HR or a COO particularly, because we're still so small, still getting started, trying to do what I can to help step into those roles as well, but also calling out the need for it.
Yeah. So, two things. I mean, I could say 100 things based on everything you just shared, but I'll limit myself to two. First of all, so critical that you, as a leader in this organization, are modeling the behavior that you're encouraging your other individual contributors to take. I will say I've been in organizations before, even incredibly large ones, where management has said, set boundaries, don't work on weekends, don't respond to messages after hours, but I don't see them modeling that behavior. And that's incredibly detrimental because as someone like me and you who love to advance in our careers, right? And particularly we were in corporate environments, that's what we were looking for. If someone who was doing the job that ultimately we wanted to do was exhibiting a certain type of behavior, that was what I thought was prescribed in order for me to rise to that level. If I wanted my boss's job, I had to do what my boss was doing, which was not setting boundaries in her or his life, was not setting work-life boundaries. So, the fact that you are not just encouraging others to do that, but you are demonstrating that behavior yourself is so critical. The second thing I'll say is, and I think you mentioned this before, I had a very similar experience. Similar to you, I was laid off from Facebook. I actually didn't realize that you were laid off, Rosalyn. So thank you
Yeah.
so much for sharing that. I spoke really openly about this in our last podcast. And similar to you, I felt golden handcuffed to Meta, Facebook, because of the incredible health benefits. I have a chronic disease. I have type 1 diabetes. We're in an insulin crisis in this country. When I was at Facebook, I paid pennies for my insulin. It's unlike anything I'll ever experience again in my life. So it was very hard for me to reckon with the idea of leaving that. Even though maybe from a mental health standpoint, I wasn't thriving and I didn't feel really fulfilled as much from a outsider perspective looking in. Physiologically, I was incredibly well resourced because of this amazing health insurance. And I think there is this perceived trade-off. And just to be honest, it is a trade-off. Startups, especially early days, they don't have benefits. That is the reality of joining a startup and being part of the founding team. You're not going to have healthcare coverage. It's really great that you are aiming to, once you do raise capital or you do have enough revenue generation, that's something you're going to be able to offer to your employees early on. Because I know a lot of startups who get pretty far and they don't think to prioritize health insurance. So again, this is why it's so critical that people like you or at companies like Resilient Moment at the stage you're at, because it really sets the precedent and the priorities moving forward from a very early stage.
Thank you. I have definitely seen many startups that have kind of taken this shortcut to profitability or shortcut to growth at the
Yep.
expense of employee health and wealth. And your mental health is just as important as your physical health. I've learned that through a lot of my own mistakes and my own experience as well. I've never gotten it right. I feel like as someone who's starting a company, that this is an opportunity to set things right and try to change the course. I don't feel like I would be as comfortable doing that if I wasn't in a leadership position, to be honest. I don't feel like I would have the voice and the authority. So I do feel it's very important for founders to either come in with EQ and to build with values or to get a coach and frankly learn that skill set because
Yeah.
you're just
Or
not
have
going to be able to get the
advisors.
best out of people. Yeah,
Yeah, or have a board of advisors, like, make
exactly.
sure you're having that diverse perspective in the room, and I think the great thing about other founders like Vadim is he acknowledged the limitations he had when it came to his ability to empathize with folks like yourself. The best thing you can do in those situations is hire those people, team up with those people. They're gonna be the ones who can be that voice for your company moving forward. So I think it's just incredible the way that Resilient Moment is approaching building team and building for inclusivity. With that, I would love for you to bring our audience a little more up to speed. You kind of let us know that you've been building the Joyment app. It's about to release. You've been heads down working on it for a year. Bring us up to speed. What can our audience expect from this app? Tell us a little bit more about it and anything else you'd like to share about the work you're doing most recently at Resilient Moment.
So our app is called Join It. You can think of it as having a life coach or a therapist on speed dial anytime that helps you with dynamically generated exercises and support that help you reduce your stress and anxiety. So we're launching very soon on the App Store. Can't find us quite there yet, but we do have a special offer for listeners of this podcast. We'd love to invite you to try out Joyment. You can go to www.joyment.app, sign up. There's a drop down. You can select that you heard about us through the Marginal podcast. And then we will follow up and we'll send you a code so you can get started with a free trial. So, really excited to share more about this. We're building it in a way that's privacy focused. All of your information is secure and private and never shared, not even in the cloud. And we're building with intention to make sure that we're culturally informed as well. And we're doing a research partnership with a university helping work with future social workers and counselors to ensure that they can use this with their clients as well. So, helping inform a future generation of social workers as they enter the workforce to know about the digital tools that are out there and to be better educated about how these tools might complement their existing practice.
That's incredible. That B2B application as well is super smart. Again, we're synergizing your direct to consumer, your consumer product knowledge, and your business to business knowledge. Another question I have about Joyment, Roslyn, you don't need health insurance to qualify for using the app, correct?
That is correct. So we are making this as affordable as we can. When I was going through my own journey, it can cost hundreds and you can be on wait lists for months to be able to find a therapist that is the right fit for you. And this is a plan that can be used independently, whether or not you're currently with a therapist. And you can use it as a self care tool on your own. So you don't need insurance. In some cases, we are actually able to help, especially if you're a student or someone who's working in the education space and budget for the subscription might be a little bit out of your reach, you can contact us and we'll personally work with you on a situation that will best suit your budget.
I love that. As someone who's married to an educator, that goes so far. I can be the first to tell you. And as somebody who is a founder and works with other founders and has an audience of founder listeners, I know this could be incredibly impactful too, because a lot of them are not operating with health insurance. So, how great that we can democratize some of this tooling and support for them through products like your own. Thank you so much, Roslyn. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience today? Any advice or anything you want to make sure listeners walk away with from our conversation?
I just want people to know that anyone can start their own company and their business. And it's pretty incredible to see this new generation that's coming through and starting their own businesses and being able to actually apply their experiences and bring their whole selves to building these great companies. I feel that the more people have these conversations, the more people are going to be interested in seeing themselves in that picture and wanting to start their own company or contribute at a startup. So I really think that there's no better time to do that than now. And I want to encourage people to know that they can find support. So there's this podcast, which is amazing. And I'm so glad you're doing this. And there's this community. Like, I feel really grateful to have met you. And I know that there are others out there as well, because I've just in the past few days since meeting you have connected with other women founders in the space. And it's just exciting to think about the opportunities that we have. So 80% of women are making informed purchasing decisions. Yet, as we know, and this was not common to a lot of people that I actually talked about. So I was surprised because I knew this very well, that less than 2% of women founders actually get venture capital funding. So that just tells me there's a lot of opportunity to build better products and to actually innovate. And there's so much space to do that. I feel like the movement is happening now. So I really do encourage people who may not come from like the traditional background or may have not seen themselves previously as an entrepreneur to think about that and to know that they're not alone.
It's funny, I feel like you just encapsulated the mission statement of this podcast, so thank
Okay,
you
I'm
for
glad.
doing
I
my
mean, that's
job.
good.
For me, it's
Yeah.
late on a Friday, so thankful you have a very active Friday brain while mine is kind of waning. But yeah, thank you for
Yeah.
capping off the discussion so appropriately, Rosalyn. Where can our audience find more information about Joyment, your journey, any subsequent apps you're going to launch, as well as where can they get in touch with you and learn more about your entrepreneurial pursuits?
Sure. Well, they can go to www.joyment.app, JOYMENT.app, and they can find out more about us there. They can also follow us on LinkedIn. We're on Instagram as joyment.app, and feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to share my email address with you as well. So if anyone wants to contact you afterwards and get in touch, happy to talk to someone and share a bit more and connect.
I can promise these one-on-one conversations with Rosalyn are well worth it. So we'll include the contact details in the episode notes if anyone wants to get in touch directly. Rosalyn, thank you so much again today for sharing your stories with us and a bit of your wisdom and promotion with our audience of listeners as well. That's so, so generous and so on brand based on everyone I've spoken to so far at Resilient Moment. So thank you again.
Thank you, Abby. Thanks for making the Marginal podcast and making this possible.
Thank you for listening to the Marginal Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the team at Rev Science with theme music by Siddhartha. You can find full episode show notes at marginalpodcast.com and follow us at Marginal Podcast on Instagram. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast anywhere podcasts can be found and on YouTube at Marginal Podcast. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you next time.